Good morning, everyone. I'm Farini Mundy, the president of the University of Maine and our regional campus, the University of Maine at Machias. We're very happy to be with you today to do a budget town hall forum. Normally we do several of these a year. This has been a very different year, and we'll walk through what's been happening. But first, I'd like to introduce my colleagues who are all here, both to be a part of the presentation and also to be available as we do Q&A. Then I'll explain about the Q&A and then we'll jump right in. Going around my screen, and I'll actually ask the person to speak themselves, but Dan Qualls, who is the, Dan, please introduce yourself from Machias.
I'm the head of campus here at the University of Maine at Machias, and I'm the vice president of academic affairs here as well.
Great, thank you. Welcome, Dan and John.
Good morning, everyone. My name is John Volin. I'm the executive vice president for academic affairs and the provost.
Claire.
Morning, I'm Claire Strickland. I'm Chief Business Officer for the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias. Hello, everyone.
Kimberly.
Good morning. I'm Kimberly Whitehead, Vice President and Chief of Staff. Good morning.
Sam.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sam Warwick. I'm Director of Government and Community Relations in the System Office.
And all of these folks are here to both be part of the presentation and to help answer questions. So Claire, if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen. And as she's doing that, let me explain how this will go. We have a fairly detailed and somewhat lengthy presentation, which we will provide. At the same time, we know you will have questions. And so there are a couple of ways to get your questions in, and we'll be tracking those as we speak. And we'll be prepared to take a couple of breaks during the presentation to begin to answer them. And at the same time, then be prepared at the end to respond to those that we've not answered. So the two ways to get questions in are as follows. Send an email to umaine.alerts@maine.edu or enter your question into the chat. Kimberly, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yes, okay, and we have folks keeping track of those. So again, as much as we can, we'd like for this to be interactive. I wish we could all be together in a space, but we're not. And so here we are. This is the fiscal 21 E&G budget update, and we realize that there are people out there who probably are not as familiar with our budget and the details of how it works. So we will be including a little bit of kind of tutoring as we go, we hope, to help educate and acquaint everyone with how budgeting works, the education and general budget part of our operation works here at the University of Maine and UMaine Machias. So next slide, please. And special thanks to a few folks who've been instrumental in helping us get this presentation assembled. Deb Allen, Assistant Provost for Institutional Research and Assessment, Sharon Buchanan, who is a Finance Communications Specialist, and Alicia Wyman, Director of Budget and Business Services. They have just been extraordinary because we've had a lot of material to put together and assemble, and they've been at the core of it. So thank you to the three. So here's the outline for this presentation, which of course we will be making available on the President's website as we do any of our public presentations. I'll say a little bit, some of us will say a little bit about the context for higher education finances right now, which are challenging nationally. Then the provost will talk to us about the frameworks that we use to determine budget decisions, and he'll go into detail about what we've been doing in the past few months in particular. Fiscal year 2021, okay, which began in July, so we're already into the second quarter of 2021, has been an extraordinary year, like no other in anyone's recent memory, where in fact we do not yet fully have an approved budget across the UMaine system, although we will within a very short time. We'll come to that, and Claire Strickland, our CBO, will be essential in helping us to all understand what 21 has been, to give a high-level picture of how we have gotten to where we are, but also to summarize that. And then we would like to spend the last chunk of the presentation really talking with you about the development of the fiscal 22 budget, which is already underway, and we're talking about new approaches and more engagement as we go. So with that, let's first thank you all. Everyone has been phenomenal across our campuses in helping us be back together, both on site and remotely and virtually in many, many configurations with great ingenuity constantly. And I need to say that at the beginning, that even though we are in a pandemic and there has to be so much activity about addressing the pandemic, at the same time, we are doing the core work of the university. Next slide, please. So a bit about the national, regional, and state context in which we sit, and kind of the top level message here is that the University of Maine system in general is doing very well during this extremely difficult time. But that said, this has been an expensive venture, and Sam Warren will speak to us a little bit about it. Here are just a few points, and I'm not going to read all of this to you, but across the country, there are projections about state revenues falling by significant numbers, $200 billion across the country. Across the country, universities are eliminating faculty positions in large numbers. For example, the Penn State system has reduced by 350 positions. All of this is related to the complexities of the pandemic, the uncertainties about students' participation in higher education, the notion that it may be better to wait a while till campuses are in some sense back to normal. And yet we've all learned here that there are new ways to be functioning and that we have adopted those, and we see ourselves continuing in that vein. So we are watching the national scene very carefully. Enrollment inquiries are down somewhat compared to prior years across the nation. And here in Maine, they're down quite significantly. And we're very worried about that because enrollment management goes on and we need to continue to bring in the next classes. And that is a big focus of our attention. Overall, financial impact estimated at least 120 billion in the summer, but as things go on, we expect those estimates to just get higher. And then lots of jobs lost at the state-controlled institutions of higher ed. UMass Amherst with indefinite furloughs. So I know that reading all of this, which you all see this kind of news, is kind of scary, but I do hope that we're going to be able to reassure people that that we have a solid plan here and that our budgeting is managing through this with all of the good work that so many of you have done. So you just see some of these same numbers here again. Like in Maine, many states have already asked their agencies to prepare for severe cuts, and Sam will say a bit more about where we stand on that in Maine. Enrollment overall nationally for undergraduates is down a bit. And first-year students down quite a lot, graduate students up. And that's similar to what we're seeing here in University of Maine. Next slide, please. The demographics, of course, aren't pointing in our direction in New England in general, Northern New England in particular. We do see just a depletion of the number of traditional college-age students. As we look at high school populations here in Maine, we see those numbers declining. And so universities are faced with real rethinking of their futures and what they will be and what they will look like in the coming years and how we serve a broad set of people both in Maine and beyond. So we'll go further. Sam, I'll turn to you now. So Sam is our expert on state matters in Maine, and she can tell you a bit about this slide.
Good morning. Thank you, Joan. Josette, can you advance to the next slide, please? So Joan just touched.
Driving, I think.
Oh, whoever is driving, if someone could advance to the next slide on the state impact, that would be great. Thank you. So I think the president just did a nice job of overviewing kind of the national landscape, and I can detail that a little bit more. But I was asked to speak specifically about the state's finances, and I would preface anytime I talk about the state finances, obviously it is a quickly moving target. New information is emerging weekly. I think the state's revenue forecasting committee is meeting today, actually. And so these numbers are a snapshot of where we are right now. So I caveat that. But as you can see, and as you're well aware, the state appropriation for the University of Maine system has not kept pace with our rising costs, which, as you know, are largely personnel driven. And that's not a new phenomenon. It is actually consistent over the past 15 years or so, since the Great Recession in 2008, 2009. And of course, the pandemic came at a time when we were just starting, states were just starting to get their finances back on a more even and even profitable keel following that Great Recession. So it's really frustrating that this has come and really caused us to lose all the progress that we've regained. But as you can see from this chart, state funding has kind of started to drop off in terms of our overall costs, which has really shifted the burden to students. So as you can see here, the state used to shoulder the bulk of our operational costs, and students paid and families paid a smaller share. And in about right around the time of the Great Recession, that really shifted and is remaining close, but still as a public institution, to put the bulk of the responsibility on our students and families is hugely problematic. Over the past 15 years, our average state appropriation increase has been 1.1%, and we all know from our own home budgets, our own costs at home have not increased at such a small amount. I do want to say that the state has made record investments in University of Maine system infrastructure in recent years. So it's not all a frustrating story. As folks at UMaine are well aware, in 2017, the legislature supported what will be a $50 million investment over 10 years in the new Engineering, Education, and Design Center. And then in 2018, the legislature and Maine voters followed that up with a $49 million investment in infrastructure improvements across the system, including $3 million of investment at the University of Maine at Machias, which is a very significant amount of money, certainly not what is needed, but a big step forward. And the state has also supported a number of strategic investments in the University of Maine system, including to expand early college, which we'll hear, I'm sure, more about today, given the growth both at UMaine and at UMaine Machias in those programs, to advance adult degree completion initiatives that will be very important as we try to move forward in an economic recovery. And then also 5 years ago, to strengthen university R&D, by increasing the Maine economic improvement funding by about 20% to $17.35 million. So a mixed picture, but the headline is that state appropriation is not keeping pace. And so the state's fiscal challenges make it hard to imagine that's going to get better soon. Maine has really led the nation, as we're all aware and so proud of, and deserve to take a big we have a big responsibility in the fact that the state has fared so well in the global health pandemic by minimizing the spread of COVID in the state. But that said, our economy has been uniquely hard hit by the pandemic, in large part, as you know, because its reliance on what are considered contact intensive occupations, things like restaurants and retail, hotels connected to tourism, et cetera. So even though from a public health perspective, we've fared very well in the pandemic compared to many other states, including those in the region, we have been economically harmed at a disproportionate amount. And the current projections, and again, these will change, even in the next couple of days, is that state sales and income tax revenues will be down about $1.4 billion over the next 3 years. And the state is somewhat limited in how it can address that shortfall. They can certainly, advance budget cuts, which they will undoubtedly be doing, and I'll talk about that. They can increase taxes, never popular. And they can look to drawing on the state's rainy day fund, which has about $260 million across the board. But the big place the state is going to be looking is to the federal government for relief. So far, the state has gotten $1.25 billion in relief through the CARES Act, which was the same act that brought the University of Maine about $9 million for institutional needs and about $8 million, $9 million for students. And the state has invested already much of that CARES Act relief money. There was a recommendation from a group that is looking at helping chart the state's economic recovery committee, a committee that's looking to advance the state's economic recovery that Chief of Staff Whitehead is involved in, as is Dean Hannah Carter from Extension. And that group recommended a $75 million investment in higher education to help provide some relief and support our reopening. But that recommendation has not moved forward. And so far, Maine is really unique among states in not having invested any of the federal relief it has received directly in higher education. We continue to have conversations with the administration to try to change that. But really further federal relief is going to be essential for the state. And so we have been very aggressive in engaging our congressional delegation during the course of the pandemic. They've been incredibly responsive to us. They are very well aware of the impacts of the pandemic on us financially, which as a system is about $80 million, we estimate. And we've really worked with the delegation to have them understand how various funding formulas that are being proposed in some of the relief bills being discussed in Congress right now would impact our institutions. So for example, formulas that use full-time equivalency to determine allocations of funding serve UMaine very well, but do not serve the University of Maine at Augusta very well. And so whereas formulas that use headcount serve most of our campuses much better, but not the University of Maine. And so we've been watching the various proposals, looking at the estimates of how much those would direct our campuses and advocating accordingly. You know, the good news is that all of the relief packages that have been proposed in Congress, whether it's the Senate Republican skinny bill or the House Democrats expansive HEROES Act, all include significant relief for higher education. It is not all that is needed, but it is very meaningful and would certainly be meaningful to us. So to begin closing this budget gap, absent a federal solution on the immediate horizon, the governor last month announced that she would initiate a curtailment of $221 million in general fund appropriations. A curtailment is basically the state has committed to appropriating a certain amount of money, and now they're going to claw some of that back. It is something that does not need legislative action. It is a tool that the executive can do on her own. And so that larger $221 million cut to begin closing the short-term budget gap included a $2.25 million cut for the University of Maine system, which of course was already flat funded going into this fiscal year. And I would say we don't like to celebrate cuts, but we were originally asked to plan for a $22 million cut, a 10% cut to our general fund appropriation. So to ultimately receive a 1% cut was a testament to the understanding of the administration on the impact that the pandemic has had on our finances, and in turn, the impact that the university has had, and especially the University of Maine, in helping address the state's needs during the pandemic, all the activities that you're so well aware of. And with that, Joan, I'll turn it back to you and happy to answer questions as they come up.
Thank you, Sam. Very, very nice summary of where things are. And we know that we have a lot of folks on the line. We are not seeing a lot of questions yet, but I hope you can stay with us because there may be more. And we just wanted everybody to have a really big context for this because we're through this presentation, we're going to dive fairly deeply into some of our details. With that, I would like to turn to Provost Vollen. This will be his first budget presentation with all of us, and delighted to welcome him here. He has jumped in with both feet to all of our activities and is taking tremendous leadership in helping us to think about our future. So Provost Vollen.
Well, thank you very much, Joan. I greatly appreciate that. And good morning, everyone, again. And I want to actually thank you all. I'm going to start off with that because my family and I have been very welcomed since we arrived in the last 2 months. And I really appreciate that. So while we have this, we're in this incredible, extraordinary time, and, we just laid a little foundation of the national, regional, and state impacts that I think we're all aware of and that are certainly real. I guess I wanted to spend just a few minutes here talking about, our frameworks, right? Because these are going to still guide what we're doing, and they are guiding. So we do have, 4 interim deans. I've been here for 2 months. So I guess I kind of want to reassure the community that the work that you've done the last 2 years as a whole university coming together and developing strategic vision and values, and then more recently the Define Tomorrow initiative that started in April and May, that these are still at the forefront. And so the strategic vision and values framework is going to continue to guide us, which is our fostering learner success, discovering and innovating, and growing and advancing partnerships. And like I said, that is going to be guiding our work. And the Define Tomorrow slide that we just had up there is one of those strategic activities that we began this spring. And a lot of ideas were submitted, as you can see here. Over 250 ideas were submitted in that less than a month and a half period. And over the summer, deans looked at it, cabinet looked at it, a Define Tomorrow steering committee examined these various proposals. And then when I arrived, started discussions with faculty and staff across the university. And what we've done is, working with the Faculty Senate, working with the colleges, we've expanded the Define Tomorrow steering committee. And so part of our work will be retrospective, looking at what was done this summer, and then moving hopefully fairly quickly on this. And just as it happens, just the way the calendar worked out, our Define Tomorrow steering committee will be meeting this afternoon to kick off that work. We will be updating the entire community within the next few weeks about as we're moving forward. And so be on the lookout for that. And so that I kind of wanted to reassure everyone, we are still moving forward with the amount of work that you've all put in the last 2 years. And our budget, as we talk about it, will reflect some of that throughout this morning. And like Sam, I'm also very happy to answer any questions that may come up either now or throughout the presentation.
So I'll jump in at this point now and say a little bit more as we kind of come closer to the real details. And one thing I want to say, and I think this is should be inferred from what John had to say, which is that budgeting in an ideal world needs to be driven by strategy, by prioritization, by the principles, by the strategic vision and values really of an institution. And we are committed to that. This has been a very strange year, and you'll hear about this shortly, but we're getting ready to do the budget build for 2022. And so the strategic vision and values, the Define Tomorrow, other efforts underway across the campus, all of that will need to feed into our plans for 2022. And as I believe everyone knows, since I've gotten here, I've been very committed to transparency and engagement of the community in the budget development process. And we continue to find new ways to do that even now. That said, fiscal 2020, of course, when the pandemic hit in March, as we got close to the end of the fiscal year, brought its own significant challenges. And here's another place where we should have a thank you, because this has meant changed processes for everyone on our campus, not only in the behaviors and adjustments that needed to happen with the pandemic, but with the fiscal situation being revised in a sense. So as you all know, travel has been curtailed. all positions are reviewed at multiple layers now. I know to the frustration of some of you, but we have worked on streamlining those processes, and as special cases come through, we're doing our best to address them very promptly. And yet it's become now a part of how we do business, is to really justify every new position, every replacement. And that, in my view, is extremely informative to me, because I read every one of those justifications. And I understand much more about the institution and how we are making decisions both locally and more centrally. The CARES Act funding has been an incredible resource for us and for our students. It has helped us to offset the room and board reductions that were done in the spring of 20. It also is, of course, a source for dollars that went straight to our students. And our students are experiencing fairly significant hardship in many cases, and keeping them in mind, in view, must be central in all that we do. In general, there was a call to reduce spending, and purchasing cards were capped, and there was a lot of effort across the campus that paid off for us, and we're very grateful for all that everyone did. For our donors who came together and helped us create and grow the Student Crisis Fund, that has been an incredible resource, and students have come with very, very fundamental requests to that fund, and we expect to need to continue that kind of support. And finally, through it all, we've been working on strategic planning and the Define Tomorrow work, and that will continue. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, we're part of the way into Q2 of fiscal 2021, and our budget is not final. Normally, the budget would have been finalized back in the spring by the Board of Trustees. And although we're going to talk specifically in a minute about how the budget gets built and what it is and where the controls are, which, by the way, are with us here at the University of Maine and UMM, there are so many uncertainties in this budget that we've actually done 3 different versions and have brought 3 different versions, or we'll bring the 3rd to the board shortly. The uncertainties around COVID are, of course, unprecedented when you think about budgeting for the current fiscal year. Projecting student credit hours, as you'll see in a moment, is really the most significant part of the revenue portion of our budget. It really depends. Our viability depends on understanding the credit hour number really thoroughly, and that has been perhaps most significantly difficult for us to project well. We didn't know at the times that we normally were creating this budget in January and then again in March and so forth, if we would even be able to come together face to face. And of course, the expenses and revenues look very differently depending on that. And that decision hadn't been made, which made it difficult to project how our auxiliaries would do, how housing and dining and other units that depend upon the actual campus-based activity, how they would fare. We didn't know what we would need to do with room and board reductions, and the research losses are substantial. So all of those are a few of the uncertainties. And normally the budget would have been approved, as you see here, by May, but instead we've had 2 opportunities for revision. So next slide, please.
I'll take over from here. Good morning, everyone. Since last we met, the last public campus presentation that we had was on December 4th. And then we met with leadership. Subsequent to that meeting, we met with UMS leadership on January 28th and had our first public presentation of our budget on March 25th with the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee. Just prior to that time, we had sent students home. They left campus on March 13th, and we began remote learning on the same day as we were presenting the budget that we had been working on for the past 2 months since January. So we knew we would have to adjust at that point. And by June 26th, we met again with the FFT and the BOT and had amended our budgets one more time. And the board gave us conditional approval for our budgets. We are currently here. It's October 23rd. This presentation is being delivered. It's the first public presentation with our campus with our 2 campuses. And then next week, I believe next Wednesday, we will be presenting to both the FFT and the BOT to get final approval. And as the president indicated, we are in the second quarter of our fiscal year. And we are now getting approval of our budgets. Please remember that all of our presentations are on the president's website. This particular presentation we're doing right now will be loaded shortly after, possibly this afternoon, early this afternoon. And then what is being presented to the board is actually on the board website. So this, do you want to start, Joan? On the...
I'm going to start, and this is to take us into the details of how this works. So today we're here to talk about the E&G budget, the Education and General budget, which is not the full enterprise-wide budget of the university. The all funds budget here is at $475 million, and E&G is about 62% of that, as you can see. These other categories, the other pieces of the pie, are very important parts of our budget operation, but what we're focused on today is the E&G. I would call to your attention restricted grants and gifts, because that is a category that people are always quite interested in. Those are the dollars that come in that are going very specifically to grant-related work, to special projects that donors have identified that they wish to see accomplished on the campus, federal dollars that come into us through various kinds of formulas and so forth. So this overall budget is what we actually manage, but we're going to go directly to the E&G piece of this for our presentation today. And Claire will go into the details here, but I just want to make a point, because I get a lot of questions about, why doesn't the system give us more money? Why do we have to make all of these reductions? Why did we, not continue this program and so forth? The control of this part of the budget, by and large, sits with us. And you see here on the revenue side, we are largely dependent upon tuition and fees. And you see here the percentage and the raw number for what that includes. The state appropriation, you've heard Sam explain that. It's actually, as other universities across the country go, this is a pretty generous portion of our budget to be coming from the state, as we compare to other state institutions who are at less than this, nearly 30%. There are some other categories that are smaller, but fundamentally our revenues are tuition, appropriation, and then some smaller categories. We have to balance every year our projected revenues and appropriation against our expenses. And so we have a lot of control of the pieces of this, but not all of them. So expenses are compensation and benefits at close to 60%. Our people, our fundamental resource and asset, of course, for running the university. And then 2 other categories, which Claire can explain a bit if people are interested. So the challenge every single year when we get ready to work on the budget is to say, what are our strategic priorities? What do we anticipate in tuition and fees, primarily, because that's the big driver? Let's take a careful look at our people, our compensation and benefits. Are we going to be able to do all that we want to do with the kinds of numbers that we're projecting in each of these areas? And that's where then the art of the budget building work really comes in. Lots of conversation with deans. If we hear, for example, that some area has some sort of a foolproof idea or approach or well-verified scheme that will bring in more tuition and fees that might attract students, say, to credential programs, or an area that expects to really be able to grow and can make very credible projections about that. My hope is that we more deliberately build that into our planning in a way that's a little bit less risk averse than sometimes, and say, okay, if program X really thinks they can grow, that's going to allow us to think about how we might need to grow the staff in program X or in program Y, which is needed to support program X. So I want people to know that this piece now, where we are looking at revenues and expenses, is something that is a major subject of conversation among deans, among the senior administration, and increasingly, we hope, among the full campus. So Claire, more to say about any of this?
No, not too much more. I just want to indicate to individuals that we tend to, in this pie chart, we tend to keep scholarships and grants separate as an expense and not netted against tuition and fees. There are examples at the system level where this is netted out of tuition. That's all I'll say. And again, this is FY 2020 base budget. And the next slide that I'll be showing is the proposed FY 2021 E&G base budget, which is higher, which is $291.7 million higher. But the same thing applies as to what was said by the president. We rely heavily on our tuition and fees, and compensation is the major driver of our expenses. Anything else, President?
No, I think that's good. I'm watching questions, and don't, if I see questions that are particular to any of this, we'll pause, but let's keep
Don't
going.
dare look at questions because I don't want to lose the driving portion of this slideshow.
No, keep going. I'll watch questions.
So the same thing can be applied to the University of Maine at Machias. This is the similar slide that we showed for the University of Maine. This is the all funds category. This is a preliminary year-end spend for FY20. E&G takes up almost 70% of that, with auxiliaries taking up almost 11, and then the restricted grants and gifts close to 19%. And then we have the E&G budget as it applies to FY20. This is, again, we rely heavily at Machias on the state appropriation. And then the tuition piece is slightly smaller it's flipped a little bit at Machias. But then again, it's the same thing. Compensation is the major driver for the expense, and as well as all the other expenditures. Included in other are things like utilities, shared services, debt service, insurance, all of your supplies and services, everything that keeps a university going. The next slide again, for FY 2021 for the University of Maine at Machias, you see a smaller budget, but this is the proposed budget that we're bringing to the Board of Trustees in the coming week.
And
So,
can I pause, because I am getting some Machias questions. Central to this picture, of course, is tuition and fees. And so attracting students to either of our universities and retaining them becomes really, I think, a central activity for all of us. And finding ways to effectively attract more and more students to Machias is, I think, top of the list for Dan and team there, to be sure that those students not only come and find Machias and find programs that suit them and that we're offered to we're able to offer robustly, but also to retain those students. And I'm going to ask Dan to chime in, because there are some questions here. Here is one specifically. Are you aware that cutting programs at UMaine Machias will affect student enrollment and therefore the tuition and fees from potential students? So Dan, I don't know if that's something you'd like to take up at this moment, just for a second.
I don't want to sidetrack Claire, so I'll briefly say that we've not cut any programs. There has been a lot of talk about us cutting music, and we did not have a music degree. Music was part of an interdisciplinary fine arts program that was restructured into creative arts, but it's still there, and music is still on our campus.
Great, thank you, Dan. And Claire, there is a question that I'm going to ask you to take. It says the state appropriation is the same for fiscal 20 and 21, so no cut from the state portion?
Need to unmute myself. We were scheduled to receive an increase in state appropriation, a slight increase in state appropriation as we started this journey going into FY 2021. And as we went through the journey, we lost our supplemental appropriation, and you'll see that we also lost a curtailment. The curtailment was very small compared to what it could have been. So on the University of Maine campus, it was a little over $400,000. But with the increases that were scheduled to come in and then the decreases, it's fairly, state appropriation is very flat for the University of Maine.
I'm also going to take one more question that seems to be relevant at this place, which is, will the UMM budget always be separate, or will it eventually be consolidated with UMaine into a single budget? The long-term plan is that these two budgets would come together. However, to be sure that we understand exactly what the situation is at Machias and how to be most strategic in deciding where to go and how to go forward, previous head of campus and Dan have agreed that we'll, at least through 21, keep these budgets together until we're sure of the direction, particularly of Machias. So Claire, I don't know if you have more to say on that.
No, I fully expect that very soon. I don't know if in 22 pieces of it are coming together, but I would absolutely say that by fiscal year 23, the two budgets will be together. 22 is up in the air right now, so that's how I'll state it.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on now, Claire. Sorry to
No, it's okay.
digress.
You want to start? Do you want me to do this one, or do you want?
Trying to keep up in my notes. Yeah, I think Claire will do it. I'll just say that the focus on student credit hours becomes central, and Claire can tell you a bit about how things look right there.
Yeah, so we've had, as the slide indicates here, we have had so much support across the campus to try and recruit and retain our students. And a big thank you. I know we're saying thank you a lot during this presentation, but credit hours are the most important as far as our revenue budgets are concerned. So this slide is showing the FY 2020 credit hours that the university actually gained at census time for each of the semesters that were in the last fiscal year. So 2019, summer 2019, fall, and then this past spring. So in state, out of state, this shows that overall at census, there were 284,338 credit hours that had been accrued to the University of Maine. The next slide will show how we went through the progression, the ups and downs of our journey through, I keep calling it a journey, and many thanks to Deb Allen in our institutional research area in helping us navigate the credit hour projections. This shows that in January through March, we were, having had 284,000 credit hours in the prior year, we were and losing a large senior class and looking at the class that was coming in, we were projecting 282 credit hours in January through March. And then, as you all know, the pandemic made us pause and think what will happen to our credit hours as we move into the fall. So we revised our student credit hours as we move forward down to 277. And then our final revision as we move into October, as we move into the Board of Trustees approval of our budget, we have finalized our credit hours at projected to be 278,988. This final yellow section of the slide simply shows where we stood at census last week on October 15th. The fall budgeted credit hours, just the fall, not all the other semesters, we were budgeting at 137,935, and we were actually ahead at census time for both. And we'll go through this for the University of Maine at Machias as well, for both the University of Maine and the University of Maine at Machias. And I'll move forward and we'll look at where we were with Machias. So last year's credit hours for Machias, and in state and out of state, there were a total of 12,972 credit hours for these semesters, summer 2019 through spring of 2020. And as we were building the FY 2021 budget, we initially projected 12,526 credit hours. And again, we paused in April through June, not knowing actually, and trying to project what would be a credit hour enrollment for the fiscal year 2021. And as we were revising budgets and looking at what the census data showed, we did a revision and actually increased from our June projection. For the fall semester, and I just have to congratulate everyone at the Machias Campus, for the fall semester, we had budgeted 5,609 credit hours, and the census showed 6,172. So I'll move on.
Okay, and I'll actually jump in. Thank you, Claire. There are now lots of questions coming in, so I'm going to pause briefly to see if we can take a couple of them. Sam, any more to say to follow on Claire's answer about the state appropriation being the same from 20 to 21?
Yeah, so I think just to, I think Claire said it. So we did have a flat state appropriation enacted in the biennial budget that was passed for FY 20 and 21. It included a 3% increase in the first year of the biennium, and then a flat appropriation in the second year. The governor proposed in her supplemental budget in January, which is of course a world away, that our appropriation be increased in her supplemental budget by 3%, which was about $4.5 million. And that was largely because our personnel costs were rising $11.5 million due to the contracts that were settled after the state budget was passed. And that supplemental appropriation was on its way to passage. And then, weeks before it happened, COVID hit, the legislature shelved the supplemental budget, did an emergency budget almost entirely devoted to COVID. And so that increase never moved forward. So we entered the fiscal year with a flat appropriation. And then again, there was this curtailment of $2.25 million last month for this current fiscal year. 60% of that was absorbed at the system level, and then 40% was passed on to the campuses, and that was the 400,000 or so that Claire referenced. And so in some of the charts that are being shown, because of the rounding using 0.3 or 0.4, you're not seeing that relatively small cut, but there is actually a cut in the state aid for this current fiscal year, and that was because of their curtailment. And it's very important to note that there could be future curtailments and cuts. We're still only a quarter into FY 21, and it is very likely, given the pressure that the state is under, that they could look to us again.
So I'll just indicate the actual amount in state appropriation that we lost from our FY 20 base to our 21 base at UMaine is $4,160 out of an $84 million budget. So that's why you can't really see that in a pie chart.
There's a related question, great question. The questions, by the way, are phenomenal, so keep them coming. This one is, why is the appropriation to UMaine Machias higher as a percentage than the appropriation to UMaine? So Claire, I'm going to start, and then you can really get this right. So I've been very interested in this question about how the appropriation dollars are calculated. And this is a system level activity with extremely significant university involvement. And there actually are formulas and indicators that include looks at peer institutions that are identified by the institutions themselves. So UMaine has a set of peers that have been identified. UMaine Machias has a set of peers. And all of this, and I'm a math person, so I'll be far less precise than a math person should be, but all of this just gets kind of mushed together into a model where these percentages and dollars come out. And these processes are reviewed regularly for any kinds of changes or adjustments that want to be made. But I believe the way that this current process was set up has something to do with the question that's being asked as well, with what you asked. So Claire,
Exactly. Some of the smaller campuses are benefiting from the model right now to
Yeah.
try to bring everybody up to a certain percentage of state appropriation. Keep in mind that tuition and fees are relatively very small at the Machias campus. And about 3 years ago, I believe, 3 fiscal years ago, the University of Maine system actually put an influx of at least $1 million into the Machias campus as part of the state appropriation to help them buoy them up, with the understanding that the Machias campus would look at its programs and try to become a little more self-sustaining. So, and I'll stop there.
Here's a related question that goes back maybe to Sam. When UMS negotiates new contracts with any of the unions, do they make the appropriate adjustment to the E&G? I guess this means does the system make the appropriate adjustment to the E&G, or does each university have to increase its allotment for compensations from existing funds? Sam, who's better to do this, Sam or Claire? Claire's raising her hand. Okay.
I think I'll take this one, Sam,
Okay.
or unless you want to do this one. Okay, so I'll be Clairish and say manna doesn't come from heaven on compensation. Compensation at all campuses has to come from their own budgets. So as compensation increases, we need to set aside dollars, whether they're tuition dollars or whether there are increases or decreases in state appropriation. We need to set aside dollars for those contracts. So there is no pool of money at the system office that funds across the board or any compensation increase. It's the responsibility, and it's the same thing at all campuses. It's the responsibility of each campus to fund its labor costs. But what the system does do is project a benefit rate. So the benefit rate on those salaries and wages is determined by what the costs are of healthcare costs or retirement costs or anything, and then the benefit rate is given as a parameter to the institutions. But compensation is funded by each campus.
And I would add that as the state appropriation history reflects, our costs are very divorced from what the state gives us, right? So I use the example of what happened in this current fiscal year. You know, when the state employees have an increase as part of their collective bargaining, the state legislature has to fund that. When we have an increase, the state does not have to fund that. We asked them to fund that, and they did not do so this year. So again, the contracts that were settled in the summer of 2019, so for FY20 and 21, had a 3% year-over-year increase, which is why we requested that our state appropriation be increased 3% year-over-year. But again, we were flat funded this year, even though the legislature knew, as a result of our collective bargaining agreements, we had an $11.5 million increase in personnel costs. So again, our costs, which are largely driven by compensation, I think 74% in this current fiscal year, do not tie the legislature to giving us a certain amount of money as they do for the state of Maine employees.
So there are several Machias questions, which are making me think a couple of things. We will take them up now, but Dan, I think we may also, Dan and Claire, actually, we may want to schedule an additional session to go into greater detail with our Machias colleagues. So here, there are a couple of different questions, right? Are UMaine and UMaine Machias one school? Then another, during this presentation, all the presenters keep speaking as if UMM and UMO, and of course, UMO predates me a lot, so I call us UMaine. Are they one school? So this, this question deserves its own entire day of discussion. It goes back to a board action in 2017 that was very specific as a policy that called us, that put the two universities into what was called a primary partnership with the University of Maine at Machias as a regional campus of the University of Maine. And over the past 3 years, there has been excellent work done on both campuses, much of it together fully collaboratively. to give definition to what it means to say, to say UMaine Machias is a regional campus of UMaine. And I'm going to turn to Dan to tell you a little bit about some of that work. And a lot of it's behind the scenes. So some of the folks, of course, on this call aren't necessarily seeing it. We need to make it as transparent as we can. But UMaine budget personnel are fully and thoroughly engaged in UMaine Machias budget work. In fact, are working directly with Dan to lead that work. So we are well aware of what it means to be partners. And we're trying to figure out what that looks like, because there's this other consideration, which is this: the state of Maine in statute requires that the university system have 7 separate universities. And so, as some of you who follow policy closely can imagine, we have a board policy requiring us to create this relationship, which is working quite well overall. And we have a state statute that requires that Machias keep its identity, keep its separateness in some sense. And so we and people before me as well have worked very, very hard to give that definition. Related to this is a question about, is UMM, it says, so now we UMM are supposed to be a self-sustaining campus. Actually, before the 2017 primary partnership, UMM was supposed to be a self-sustaining campus. Today, although we still maintain separate budgets, we have consolidated a lot of services and a lot of activity together, so that in many ways the partnership is taking on more operational meaning. Dan, is there more that you'd like to add at this time on this?
I agree with you, Joan, that this could be the topic of an entire non-budget specific meeting, and I know one's coming, so we can move that up so that it's sooner. But you're absolutely right. If you think about all the departments at the University of Maine at Machias and how they either have a reporting line, either solid or dotted, or collaborations, the list is long. Facilities, admissions, student life, our business office. It just goes on and on. So we have been working on this collaboratively for the last 3 years. And we've just started this past year looking at the academic collaborations, and psychology and community studies kind of led the charge with our MHRT certificate minor, which the University of Maine has adopted. So it's and our gen ed core, we've aligned the framework of our gen ed core with the University of Maine's. That was all done last year with a lot of heavy lifting from faculty and the folks in the registrar's office. But I agree, John. I think this is this could be a whole, we could spend a couple hours on this one.
Absolutely. So with that, I'm going to go back into our presentation now. We are watching the questions, and we'll have time to get to many of them. As we've previewed, getting to a balanced budget for fiscal 21 has been quite an adventure. Here we outline at a very high level, and we can go into detail if people are interested, sort of what it looked like over time. So in January, pre-COVID, we already were dealing at UMaine with a $7.3 million gap after we had done reductions by $8 million that were very painful for the campus to reach. And we knew we still had to find more, and we were at January time looking for ways to do that, doing as much of it centrally as we could manage, because we were still in the aftermath of fiscal 20, looking at projections, being concerned about our student numbers, and being concerned about where we also needed and wanted to invest in personnel and how to balance all of that. But then the pandemic hit, and everything that we had worked on up until then was a base for what happened beginning in March. So in March, at the end of March, without a lot of time yet into the pandemic to understand even how to project, we were able to come in with a $4.6 million gap. We adjusted credit hours, and we also worked on compensation issues. So there were some changes in our projected budget that came through in March. And then we did it again in June, because we knew a lot more. We knew what had happened in 20. We had some enrollment projections coming. We still presented a gap at that time, But we also were now able to have more information feeding into what we were doing. And by the way, particularly for Claire, but for any of us, you know, the goal is to present a balanced budget. The goal is to figure out how to do this ourselves. And yet we repeatedly we're finding we simply could not do that at the University of Maine. And then in October, coming up, as you've heard, we have another meeting. We will continue to present this gap, I believe, but we also have a proposal for how to balance when we get to this meeting, which will be that we have some additional one-time dollars in reserve. They don't help us with our real base budget issues, but they are a way that we get through. And frankly, for years, UMaine has been reliant in some ways on that set of dollars, and we're very grateful that they're there. But Claire, I'm going to ask for you that if I've misstated anything here.
No, you're doing, I'm not muted. This is fine. The $4.4 million is really going to be taken up by a transfer from reserves of 3 million, and
Yeah.
we have a negative unassigned budget of about 1.4 million. So as it's presented to the BOT, the bottom line will be 0, but we have a transfer from reserves and also a negative unassigned budget, which we'll try to fill as we go through FY 21 and fill as we go through FY 22. So it gives us more time to do things.
And as the deans and department chairs well understand, the syncing of budgets and hiring needs in general is very complicated, because even if we begin to search for folks in one fiscal year, they're not likely to be able to get here until the next fiscal year. And so we have to have a sort of longer term view built in. And we have to have those reserves available in the colleges to cover the instructional needs when a person is out in that year of searching. So very complicated in general. And then you add the uncertainty of this year. So I have to commend the deans and the provost's office, both under Faye Gilbert and under now with Provost Vollen, for being just extraordinarily flexible and helpful in trying to look at least at 3 different versions of how the personnel situation would look for them. Again, because the bulk of our expenses do come in personnel, and the bulk of that comes in academic affairs. So there has been a lot going on in terms of, well, we'll fill this position, or maybe we won't fill this position, or we'll hold and decide whether to fill this position, or we'll decide that this program does need to sunset or combine with another, and maybe we need to do that right away, and maybe we don't. The uncertainty of this is unprecedented. And so in many ways, one of my views is that if we can get through 21 balanced and manage ourselves through 21, our focus needs to be on 22. That's where we will really be able to be strategic and more planful, I hope, although it feels like we've been doing a lot of planning. So Claire can tell you about the reductions at a high level in the next slide.
Okay, so what we try to do, and I'm missing a column, but we'll work on it and we'll be fine. This is basically showing the FY20 base budget as it stood. You recall this number for UMaine, $288 million, and the percent that the larger units take of that budget. So academic affairs, you can see, is 58.2%, and then the rest of the areas follow. So then what we did is the reduction amount moving into FY 2021, we had to basically realign, cut 13.5, the bottom number here, 13.5, almost $6 million to get to that $4.4 million gap. So in academic affairs, over the course of through December through June, there was in academic affairs alone was $8.4 million, with all of the other areas. Student life did 5.62, and as a percentage of their FY20 budget, this was the percent. Now you could all do as a percentage as it is of the total budget, and that's the column I'm missing, but we won't go there. So as we move into FY21, the final budgets for FY21, after we've applied compensation increases and all, the investments that we've made in different areas after we've cut. The final 2021 budget is this $291 million budget. And you can see that academic affairs has increased because of those the compensation and the investments that we've made. So the percentage of the total FY21 budget, and I'll just take academic affairs as an example, and I can do others as well, is that it's a 0.1 reduction moving from 2020 to 2021, even though $8.4 million was cut here. And please note that the financial management area here is it basically includes, it also includes utilities, shared services, debt service, insurance, all of these areas that we don't have as much control over. So the next slide, if there are there questions, Joan, or should I move
I
forward?
think keep going. I'm sure there will be.
Okay, so we're doing the same thing, you know, getting to a balanced budget for the University of Maine at Machias. When we met with leadership, do you want me to do this, Joan?
Yeah,
or-
go ahead, sure.
When we met with leadership in January of 28, we had already reduced budgets by $343,000, and there remained a $525,000 gap. Going to the March 25th, we were meeting with the FFT. We were able to present a budget that had a $270,000 gap. And then moving on to June, we made adjustments to the budget that produced and continued to produce a $145,000 gap with the adjustments in credit hours and tuition projections and state appropriation adjustments, so that as we're going into the October 28th meeting with the FFT, there is an $145,000, what I term a gap, which will be absorbed by a transfer from reserves in FY21. And this is down, significantly down from what we had projected in 2020, having to use reserves to the amount of almost $400,000, which we never had to use because Machias really did a good job in trying to reduce its expenses on a one-time basis. So 2021, Machias has a $145,000 gap, which will be covered by reserves on a one-time basis. And this is just an overview of what was cut and what was reallocated to Machias over the course of moving from December through October.
I'm going to jump in here because we're using, you know, we're using language up here that I know is alarming to folks. And what I said at the beginning still holds. Even in the very, very difficult circumstance of 21, our decisions about what to do are driven by strategy, are driven by vision and values, are driven by the current context. And so these budget reductions may well have been made anyway, even if we had not faced the kind of challenge we face right now. These are part of long-time campus conversations using many, many factors as we make these decisions. And I will turn to Dan if he wishes to say more. But one factor, for example, is that the system has in place something called programs for examination, a process where they each year run numbers on programs across the system and single out some programs that are seen as vulnerable. Either they are too small, or they are not producing students, or their retention is low. And so there's a lot of data behind all of this discussion. I will also say that the system is working to I think, improve that programs for examination process and allow campuses to add in more variables to be considered that are important to them. But my point, I guess, is just that although we need to report these numbers to you here because of this process, we also want to share, excuse me, that this is just part of ongoing planning that occurs in universities and on our two campuses constantly. Dan, more to add to that?
Yeah, I can in a couple of spots. So with programs for examination, we have a few that show up on that list every year. So what the faculty did, I think starting in probably spring of 2019 and then to current time, is we've been taking those programs and restructuring them, sometimes adding concentrations, sometimes subtracting concentrations. We had environmental studies, which was always a low enrolled program, which kind of has been reborn as GIS environmental studies. So the programs that are examined, they're not automatically cut. We take a look at them and think strategically, how are we going to move forward with this program? And so I'm pleased to say that our programs we tend to restructure. With athletics, that was a good point, Joan, that athletics was flagged for a number of reasons prior to the pandemic. Our facilities need renovations. Our student athletes were not really given, the environment that they needed to be successful. So that was flagged way back in December and January in terms of retention, and then with the pandemic, it did make things easier. But that's so these aren't just reactive measures. These are things that we've been working on and looking at strategically for a while now.
Thanks, Dan. There's a good question about, can we get a bit of detail on what is included under student life and inclusive excellence? So Claire, this is back a couple of slides, and president's areas, and perhaps other areas in the slide. So again, diving in for a bit more detail, we'll turn to Claire.
I'll need a little bit more information as to what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's what, I think it's give a little more definition for what's in student life and inclusive excellence that is is adding up to $6 million, and what's in the president's areas that's adding up.
Okay, thank you. Student life and inclusive excellence is under a vice president for student life and inclusive excellence, Robert Dana. So it's all the programmatic efforts underneath that area. It includes the counseling center, the career center, all of the activities associated with quote unquote student life and inclusive excellence now. Under the president's areas, we have the president's office, we have athletics is also included under reports directly to the president's office, as well as the two museums, the Hudson Museum and the Maine Museum of Art, and including the Children's Center as well. If I've forgotten one.
Collins Center.
The Collins Center for the Arts. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that includes everything that's under the president's areas. And I don't know if Robert is here or not, but I think I've captured most of the essence. Oh, student accommodations are included in student life as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. That part's hard for me to tell. Always frustrating that we can't see the audience, but
I know.
they'll ask another question if they have one. And I'm going to take up a question just because it's a good time. Will the new unified accreditation affect our budget, since tuition and fees drive our budgets? Again, unified accreditation, which has been achieved by the system with good work by many people from all across all of our campuses. That unified accreditation, in my view of it, is just an incredibly flexible and potentially very useful tool for all of us. We have already, with UMaine and UMaine Machias, we're ahead on the business of trying to figure out how we can have, as Andy Egan used to say, a genuinely mutualistic relationship. And Dan gave you an example of an area where Machias has some programming available that UMaine doesn't so much have, where we are already seeing UMaine students interested in participating in that program, and the reverse of that will happen as well. Those kinds of arrangements are now going to be completely available and flexible across the entire system. So if there are a couple of courses in forestry at UMaine Fort Kent that might be of great interest to UMaine students in some of our fields, Going forward, we'll be able to make arrangements so that that can happen seamlessly and easily, and that tuition flow and flow of cash and dollars would be worked out appropriately. I look at unified accreditation as an incredible opportunity for us to be even more creative and for us to bring so many of the great UMaine and UMaine Machias programs system-wide, and to increase numbers and to increase interest and to increase impact. So there's a lot of opportunity to work on some of this unified accreditation. If people out there are interested, we're forming committees and forming working groups, and you'll have the chance to make that something that you might engage in if you wish. We'll go to the next slide now, Claire. These are the last two of the 21 discussion coming up.
Can I just say that I forgot to include police and safety under Robert's area?
Okay, right. One reduction area has been in housing and dining, and our by design, in part, our numbers are a bit down from 20 to 21, but some of that too is as a result of the unpredictable semester in which we are working right now, with students not necessarily being sure of whether being on campus in dormitory housing would be what they would wish. And so we are down a bit there, and that affects lots of aspects of our revenues, right? It affects meal plan, dining, and so forth. I did want to go back to the last one just briefly, Claire. I really want to make the important point about the reservation of space for students who may need quarantine or isolation. That has been very important for us to have, and we're not using much of, if any of it right now, but that is critical to being able to help stay open in a healthy and safe way during the pandemic. So let's go to the next, please. Similarly for Machias, Machias was able to do the very attractive thing of offering single rooms this year, but you can see that these numbers are down and had been lower than we would have liked even coming in into 21. So for Machias, for all of us, but particularly for Machias, focusing on the programmatic offerings that will attract students and focusing on retention are critically important. So we can go on to the next one. We're not going to go on to the next one quite yet, because I thought we'd take a little bit of a moment here, go to some questions, and then turn to how we're thinking about the future. So several questions about the work that Jeff Hecker did last year on changing the internal budgeting process to take account of revenue generated by units. That's called Responsibility Center Management. And Dr. Hecker did an excellent report on a proposal really for this, for the university system at my request, but not for the system, for the University of Maine, at my request to do essentially a study and an examination that produced a set of recommendations for the university to move to RCM. At the same time, the other thing that Jeff did, which I think people might find quite useful as well, was a budget primer that explains our process, which of course is one that has grown up over the years, and increasingly, I think, is one that we're looking to bring much more publicly. And so the work that Jeff did on that primer is especially important. I promised the Faculty Senate that I would write a kind of a response to the RCM proposal. As you can see, that proposal came in right in the middle of us being in what I would call kind of a disarray precipitated by a pandemic relative to budgeting. It was not a moment when there was any bandwidth for anyone to take a really deep look at what it would take to move to an RCM model. Since that time, we have a new provost who is here. Several of us have spent quite a lot of time looking at RCM as it works in other universities. It is not a universal cure-all to anything. It brings a number of serious challenges and some pretty interesting advantages too. So what we're doing is that I'm preparing a kind of response on this. We won't be moving to an RCM model in fiscal 22. We will look at aspects of the report, suggestions in the report, to see if there are ways that we can begin to implement some of them. Among them, university-wide budget advisory group. Now, the Faculty Senate does have a budget and planning group, FIPSI, whose acronym I never remember, something must be Finance and Institutional Planning Committee. Is that close, Claire? And that group has expressed great interest in being more actively involved in budget development. And so Provost Fallon and I and Claire are talking about how we can do that going forward. So transparency is vital. Visibility into the way the process works, which isn't exactly the same as transparency. That's also needed not only by deans, but by department chairs and heads of schools and faculty who are interested in all of this. And to be very honest, the notion that units that are able to generate revenue, that have great ideas for how to accelerate revenue in some way, we have some funding set aside to actually help to incentivize that. And then we are able, because if you're watching those numbers carefully, you will see we did not do across the board reductions. We are trying hard to be strategic. And if we see units that have really credible ideas and plans and track record for growing, we have to find a way to help grow the faculty and staff as well in those units. All of that to come. It's not a bad segue to 22, but I wanted to take up the question directly. And we have much good thinking in both of those reports that will be guiding our thinking going forward. So is the budget process conversation still continuing? I think I can honestly say yes. It's going to be a process question that continues for quite some time. It's hard to retain students. Okay, I'm going to come back to that one in a minute. Do you anticipate a faculty buyout to help balance the budget for 2022? We are focused really on, again, our revenues and our expenses for 2022, how we can be strategic. Anything like that would, of course, be a system level discussion. But good to see the question, because I assume that means perhaps there's interest. I don't know. Maybe that person can follow up with me separately. What about the proposed change to the internal budgeting process to take account of revenues generated by units? Is there still consideration? I think I have answered that one. Okay, we're going to come back to some Machias questions in a moment. Let's go to the next slide then. Let's start to talk about 2022 and what we will be looking at. And we've had questions coming in about the Alfond grant. So we've added this slide for me to speak briefly about it. This is a phenomenal opportunity for the entire University of Maine system, as well as for UMaine and UMaine Machias. This is a $240 million gift to come in over 10 to 12 years. So I'm just pausing there. Nobody has written us a check for $240 million yet. There is a lot of time that needs to pass, but also a tremendous amount of work and great opportunity for all of us. As any of you who have worked on grants or who have written grant proposals or who are PIs on projects, you know that a proposal is put together. It is presented to the funder, and then the dollars come in to do the work that was proposed. And so that's exactly the case here. The Alfond Foundation and leadership from across the system have been working for many, many months to come to agreement about a set of proposals, really, that would advance our system, advance our university, and also be in areas that the Alfond Foundation would be interested in funding. So it's an extraordinary act of generosity. It is an incredible vote of confidence in all of us, and I'm sort of past the great excitement about seeing this, and now really working with colleagues and some of you out there on the line I know too, to do this work. 4 parts to the project. First is Black Bear Athletics at $90 million. This is strictly to the University of Maine. This is the next step in a long history of commitment by the Alfond Foundation and direct interest of Mr. Alfond himself when he was alive, direct interest in the Division I athletics programs of our university. So it is very specifically targeted toward us. And with that, there is a $20 million match required. So the total project can be construed as $110 million of investment. A strong commitment there to Title IX and to equity, to gender equity, and of course to safety, to renovation of facilities across our athletics complex. in ways that can bring us to where we need to be as a D1 institution. And also very strong attention to the fact that we are a statewide site. Really, we should be a destination for high school athletics championships, for math counts and US first robotics, and for science Olympiads and science fairs. And the idea here is that we are fortunate to be able to create that kind of an environment for our campus going forward. Student success and retention is the second area. This has been a very strong interest of the chancellor and of course of people on both of our campuses for several years. I'll remind folks of the first year student success initiative here at the University of Maine that Provost Hecker led, that was about with Vice President Dana as well. This was all about how do we as a campus really combine our resources, combine our offerings in a way that is supportive of student success. And in that work, there was quite a lot of very helpful data about why we have failures in retaining students, which groups are most vulnerable to not being able to stay with us. All of that, of course, gets exacerbated in a pandemic, but a sizable investment into student success and retention, which will require a $25 million match. So we have much to do. I just want to say, to be very clear, this gift has been made, the agreements have been settled. They are very high level, general descriptions with you know, a lot of indication of what we would hope to do over the 10 to 12 years. And so the work now is coming together to operationalize, to look at what we have agreed to, and to figure out how we take and use that on our campuses and expand it. So with a $25 million required match on student success, again, the opportunities are endless, I think. A Maine College of Engineering, Computing and Information Science with $75 million coming there, and a required $75 million match to be led by the University of Maine collaboratively, in particular with the University of Southern Maine and with all of the campuses in the system and the private sector and state government as well, to take the extraordinarily good work that we have here in our College of Engineering, to take the great work in our School of Computing and Information Science, and in a sense, think about the future of that and how that becomes a resource even more fully for the state of Maine. Much to do there. A big chunk of those dollars would go toward renovation of buildings on this campus. And we are so excited about the Furland Engineering Education and Design Center coming up, but we have other engineering buildings that serve as classroom buildings for many, many disciplines as well that are in dire need of attention. And so these dollars will help us with that. And then finally, the Maine Graduate and Professional Center. Many of you, I assume on the call, are familiar with the history there. An Alphon gift launched it in Portland to be a place where law, business, and public policy could come together in ways that could serve the state and beyond. $55 million coming there with a $50 million match expected. Included there is a new building. So that's the quick overview. If we are getting ready to launch the websites and to create the opportunities for people to ask questions and chime in. So as I hope I've conveyed directly, it is not the case that dollars from this can go to things that aren't about this, but this is very broad and it encompasses a lot of what we care about. So the questions that I'm seeing about Machias, you know, it's hard to retain students when the funding keeps getting dropped and those students' programs are no longer supported. Absolutely need to focus right now on retention at Machias and every place, but because of a question like this, it suggests we need to be pulling those data out, sharing them. We need to know why it is that students don't stay with us for their full 4 years at Machias, at UMaine, every place, and what the factors are that are causing that to happen. And then to use that and use this Alphon gift to figure out what we need to do to make a difference. There's a question about how could you outline how units can submit proposals or work with leadership to flesh out proposals related to student success and retention? What a great idea. If we can figure out who submitted that, we'll put you to work at helping us put in place a process. We need to do that. We absolutely need to share information about what this is and then how people can get involved. How much in explicit terms will UMM be receiving from this donation? It seems we will be getting leftovers after UMaine. You know, that's just not fair. None of this has been worked out to that level of detail. What we need to do together right now, UMaine and UMaine Machias and the whole system, is to put our heads together and say, here's what we've agreed to do. I can say a lot more about student success if you want. I can talk about this particular slide for days. Student success, we've broken it out into 3 big focal areas. One is about research learning experiences, something that I've been talking about since I got here. And frankly, by the way, where Machias is quite strong. The idea of getting first-year students right into labs or into studios or into connections that allow them to engage with faculty scholars across the board as an engagement strategy, as a way to help people be connected and stay, because the data show us that that can make a big difference. Second piece of student success is about gateways to success. It's a deep look, something that started here at UMaine actually, on the courses that are serving as roadblocks and very high hurdles for students in the first year or two. So some gen ed courses, some of the precursor and prerequisite courses to majors that have high DFWL rates. We need to take a look at those. We need to support faculty and students with great ideas for how to continue to make those places of success for our students. And the third piece of student success and retention is pathways to careers. Very strong focus for us system-wide on making it clear that when Maine students or anybody comes to our system, they actually can see a pathway for themselves to work, to a place for professional employment, and that we are much more explicit and deliberate and intentional about helping our students see that. The first 2 of these areas, RLE and gateways, were written to be piloted initially and essentially proof of concept to happen at UMaine. And I remind everyone, UMaine Machias is a regional campus of UMaine. We have the largest and the smallest. I think the potential for us to come together and demonstrate what it looks like to put these things in place rapidly so that our colleagues across the system can collaborate and work with us, I think the potential is huge. So we are in the midst of assigning the leads for each of these groups and talking to those people. The first task that they will have will be to put together teams and look at proposals for and ideas for work, and to work out budgets both for the Alphon piece of the gift, for the match, and for the fact that it's over 10 to 12 years. So lots to do there. And believe me, UMaine and UMaine Machias are partners here. Let's see what else. Maybe there's one more before I stop talking for a minute. If you want to increase retention at Machias, then our programs cannot continue to be cut, modified, and downsized. I think head of campus, Dan Qualls, has already alluded to the fact that the kind of strategic planning that it takes to really hone in on the optimal focus and mission for Machias is well underway in partnership with us at UMaine and us at Machias. And if you're interested in those questions, I know there will be opportunities coming to get deeply involved in those discussions because we need to. It's a part of what's vital for all of us. It's about fostering learners' success. How the matching funds will be sourced. Okay, you keep asking questions. I could talk forever, so you need to stop. How will the matching funds be sourced? Typically, we do match. We have historically done match here at UMaine with heavy reliance on our University of Maine Foundation, which, by the way, is in conversation with UMaine Machias about how we can expand the development role to address Machias needs as well. But in any case, this kind of match in our conversations with the Alphon Foundation, we've all recognized that a match of $150 million, even over 10 years, is a very, very big, big commitment and big lift. So the match will have multiple components and multiple teams working on these components, coming up with ideas that can complement and plug into the 4 major areas of the work so that the match can count and so that the teams that are being built can all work together to advance these ideas. Some of that then will come from places beyond the foundations, right? The federal government, particularly the agency where I worked at the National Science Foundation, has a lot of money available for student success. It happens to be for the STEM fields, but if we are able to seek some external funding, let's say from NSF or NIH or any number of other agencies, successful grants that bolster our student success in one area, it opens up the possibilities for how funds can be deployed in other areas. Similarly, we have not fully, I think, explored all the possibilities for other kinds of corporate philanthropy nationally, and we have a team already between the foundation and UMaine looking at what is our history with Chan Zuckerberg, with Gates, with Hewlett, with Lilly, with a number of national foundations where the interests that they have may very well align with us. And then finally, we're working on corporate partnerships for the University of Maine specifically to help us move through this. So the sources will be many, many. We're talking about a process whereby people who think that they've got a great match idea and want to get kind of plugged in would somehow register and be involved. As you can see, there's a tremendous amount of setup to be done with this program, and that's all underway. Match doesn't need to be non-federal. I mean, this question says, does the match need to be non-federal or can it be federal? It can be federal. And then finally, of course, we'll be working very closely with our colleagues in the state because there is capital expense here, there's building, there's infrastructure, and we'll be working to look at the planning potentially for bonds and other approaches. I'm going to stop because I've just been talking too long and turn to Provost Vollen to talk about what's next and how we really go forward in 2022.
Well, thank you for that, President Mundy. I just wanted to add to the Alphon, presentation there. This is an extraordinary time. The scale is truly amazing. I mean, if you look at, this is in the top 50 of all gifts that have ever actually been given, whether it's public or private university. That includes the Harvard and Yales of this world, right? So it's truly, the word's often overused, but it's truly transformative. And if you were adding up the match over the next 10 to 12 years, that comes to about 170 million. And as the president and the chancellor have said, that's kind of our minimum requirement. This is an incredible chance to leverage. And the student success and retention side, as an example, I mean, I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you on these various areas. And much like the SVV over the last 2 years, there will be a lot of grassroots engagement on this and looking for wonderful ideas. So stay tuned. I think this is an exceptional opportunity. And if you dig into the details of that gift, it actually aligns beautifully with SVV and Divine Tomorrow. So we're already situated in a really good position to do well with this gift. And so really, looking forward to working with you on that.
I'm going to slip in a quick answer to a question because the way this works, everybody, I'm watching the questions scrolling along, and then when we answer one, whoever's managing this sort of takes it off the list, and I just like this idea of starting to work through them. Question, could Claire please clarify if athletics is included under academic affairs in her overall budget slide? No, athletics is under the president's areas. Okay, sorry, John, go on.
No, that's good. I mean, this was our place to actually pause and answer questions, but we've been doing that throughout, and I think we're staying up on all the questions. If I remember, the next slide is on preliminary timeline, and that was going to be turned over back to you, Joe.
You do this one.
I don't have anything else to add other than that. I think we're staying up on the questions.
So just timeline wise, let's go back. Yeah, thanks, Claire. Here's what will happen for 22. And again, we're very late. Normally this would have started in the summer. It would have started with retreats and budget planning discussions among the cabinet. And we still have plans for that kind of conversation, but it's going to be broadened out. Deans will be involved, and then we'll be encouraging deans to do the same with their leadership. We have to work on enrollment projections. I mentioned earlier, that's a worry right now because recruitment looks to be, if not down, at least slow. It's lagging. So our ability to be able to project is compromised a bit. I do have to say that the academic affairs folks and the enrollment management folks are putting together some phenomenal ideas about how we can really stand out as a place that is attractive to the students who would be entering in the fall of 21. And I know that many of you on the call are involved in that. keep those ideas coming. We need to stand out. We need to be responsive and quick. And if there are ways that you think we can do that better with the students who are seniors in high school right now in Maine and beyond, be sure that Chris Richards hears from you. The retention, of course, gives us the chance to engage with UMS Transforms, the Alphond work. The appropriation request from the system will go in October, late October, may already be in discussion now. But then the system will give some parameters, and what those are, and this is where I want to be clear, those are about any projected tuition increases that might be advocated by the board, any shared services costs, because much of what we do is actually underwritten by the system. And so we would know how that's looking and so forth, other adjustments. But we really right now are beginning the work of constant projecting, looking at our strategic funding priorities, and we'll do that into December. We thought we could get a next session announced for you today, but we will soon because you'll be engaged in that. Preliminary budget work late January, some internal, and these are not public discussions, I believe, these first discussions about our 22 budget as it looks then. That's when we have to have projections that we feel pretty good about, because we have to build everything else around that, around the student credit hours. So if the creative ideas for more revenue generation, for attracting more students, for partnering in other parts of the system in ways that might bring us more students, for credentials and certificates and sort of other kinds of new innovations, know that by really late January, we will need and we'll be calling for fairly concrete ideas about that with pretty good detail about what you estimate that to bring. And that will be the place and the way that we are able to, we hope, do not RCN, but start to really then adjust where resources go so that those places with those credible ideas actually have the chance to implement them and see the returns. I'm quite willing for us to use reserves as we need to stimulate this kind of creativity, but it's going to need to sort of come together under the SVV and under Define Tomorrow, and all of us are working on that. First public review of the 22 budget with the board committee in late March is the current plan, but again, everything is subject to the way the world might be going. And then the final in late May or June, and then ideally approval actually before the fiscal year begins. So what we'll be doing is plugging in the places where everyone can have a chance to be involved. I'm going to let John start this one, and I'll finish. I think I've got one more slide, and then we'll close.
Right. So I do recognize that we're running out of time, and I want to thank all of you who have stayed with us. We're over 200 have been staying the whole time today. And we've talked about many of these things already. I do want to actually just, and some of you have heard this in Fatih's Senate, et cetera, but I do want to follow up a little bit with what the president just said. So there is a working group that is developing a program that can really reach our deferred students. So in a typical year, we have about 50 deferred students. This year, we have 250. And we want to stay connected with these students. We want them to know that the University of Maine cares about them, and that we also want to help them so that they don't fall too far behind. So we have developed a program called Black Bear Pause. It will be coming out. We have the draft website ready to go. You'll be seeing it within a week or two. And the idea is to really reach out to our students. So the winter intercession, as an example, we've increased our winter intercession offerings by 20%. In the spring, we are going to have, right now, we have eight-week courses, mostly gateway courses, that will be focused on our deferred students. And then this summer, as part of the Black Bear Pause, you make your pause a Black Bear Pause, we are developing a series of courses that students can take for credit. Hopefully, we're looking at the financial model there to see if we can actually do a reduced tuition in that period. And we're going to connect it with Maine bound activities. And we're going to open it up. It's not yet announced, but I'm announcing it right now. We're going to work to be able to allow newly admitted students into this program in the summer, so that we can start bringing students together. Depends, of course, on the pandemic, and develop cohorts and see if we can't help with that sense of belonging and let students know out there that we're thinking about them, right? That UMaine is their community and that we want them to get a head start or at least stay connected and not, feel like they're falling behind. So I kind of wanted to share that with you. It's really new, but within the next few weeks, you will be seeing that come out. And so I think I won't go any more on these other aspects. I talked about those earlier. I don't know, Joan, if you want to talk about the Rue Center there.
Yeah, I'll say just a bit more. Let's go back, Claire, and I've got a few more questions that I think would field right now. But certainly everyone is attending to our new neighbor and new partner in Maine, the Northeastern University's Rue Institute, where the University of Maine has been a great partner, I believe, already, and we've enjoyed our collaboration so far in research and in the design of collaborative programs that would help our undergraduates see some opportunities in the master's degree level work that Northeastern will be offering. The world is full of possibilities relative to that and to other related kinds of partnerships. And so again, that will be a focus for us in our planning, and we'll be pushing and urging all of you to think about how we continue to center this university as a vital driver of Maine's economic recovery. We have been all through the pandemic absolutely central in supporting the state in everything from PPE to agriculture kinds of needs. And at the same time, our work in bringing in new funding, growth in some of our most vital research areas is happening at the same time. So we don't want to lose sight of that role that we have and how our budget actually supports this growth in partnerships. Best year ever in 2020 for UMaine research in terms of grants incoming and research expenditures, both numbers that matter a lot to our budget. There are some questions we've not gotten to that have to do with the non-ENG budget. I think that could be a separate session because we're running out of time right now. There's a great question from ASCC about recruitment and retention of, can you go back, Claire, please? Actually, it's okay. That's okay. No, we're okay. Recruitment and retention of personnel, which is very difficult, we understand in general here in many ways, but nice question. Are there plans to improve talent recruitment initiatives at UMaine? I take that as a very good and important suggestion. And we will take that and come back. Many great questions about Machias that indicate to me that we need to have more discussion there. Question about recruiting students from Unity College. We'd be delighted to see them and open to ideas about that. Retaining students, that's work underway on the campus and more to go. Dan's spoken about athletics and music. Financial aid communication, we want to be sure that students know where to go, and the name I have is Teresa Blyther on the Machias campus if you have questions there, and there's more about Machias. I would like to share my own slides for a minute if I can. I don't know if I can. On a couple of matters. Shoot, where is it? Okay. Is that showing? President's Council on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Can someone let me know if you're seeing my slide or not?
Yeah, it's showing.
All right, good. So we have not, we've packed a lot into this presentation, and I want to be sure that people understand my sort of central for me in all of this discussion needs to be the focus of this university and of UMaine on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a council that has been meeting. Dr. Whitehead co-chairs this with Dr. Susan McKay, with just an incredibly committed, very, very thoughtful and insightful set of people. And we will, in the coming weeks, host a session that allows folks to know what's going on here. But to me, this has to be the first thing we think about in all of our prioritization, in all of our efforts to be the very best university that we can be. And I just wanted to be sure to say that. Okay, I'm watching the questions, see if there's anything else I can take in the next minute. I think we will say the questions are closed, but I have one last slide. we need to take note of the fact that that Claire Strickland, our Chief Business Officer and longtime employee of the University of Maine, is retiring. And that will happen at the end of December officially, but actually Claire will be taking some vacation time in advance of that. And I just wanted to take this time with so many people who have worked for so long with Claire to say a special thank you and congratulations, and to tell you how much we will really miss you. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll miss you all, but on to a different chapter, hopefully a long one.
Thank you all. Have a good day. Be in touch, and more to come. Thanks again for sticking with us.